Welcome to Faith in 5, a weekly video devotional designed to discuss practical spiritual concepts in 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Mark Vandella. I'm preparing for a wedding message that I have to give in a couple of weeks, and sometimes I like to use analogies when I'm talking about relationships. I just think it helps us recognize where we might be in any given moment and be able to have like a mental picture to understand or engage with that thing. And so sometimes I like to use the analogy of a rowboat. When we're getting married, it's two people climbing into a rowboat. And in that rowboat, whatever we do to the other person, we do to ourselves. And in marriage, oftentimes, we kind of are faced with some of our own selfishness a little bit. We have to put ourselves aside a little bit. And so this rowboat analogy kind of helps us see that if I give love, then I'm more likely to receive it. And if I do things that are harmful inside of this boat, it doesn't just hurt the other person, it hurts me. And I share this today because I think that loving others and loving self functions similarly, but just a little bit different. So we're in the middle of our series called Beautiful Things, where we're exploring what it looks like to be more vulnerable, more authentic, and more courageous. And we're using Brene Brown's book, The Power of Vulnerability, to kind of build this. And so in her book, she has 10 different guideposts that she talks about. And the second guidepost is to facilitate self-compassion. So how do we make sure that we let go of perfectionism and facilitate self-compassion? And so that I started with this rowboat story because it's basically kind of a give and receive type thing. Well, in self-love, or I guess in the world of love, you can almost picture it like we're all carrying around a bucket. And in order for us to give love, we have to have self-love. Our bucket has to be full. We have to understand ourselves. And I think sometimes we believe that humility means that we don't have a bucket full of water because we can't love ourselves so much. And so self-compassion is just a little bit different. Essentially, if your bucket's overflowing because all you're doing is pouring into it, then you probably are out of line with your self-love. But if you make sure to take care of self enough and give yourself a break and facilitate grace within yourself, then your bucket is adequately full. And in doing so, you can also then give love and give that away from a full bucket. I mean, the realities of this life is we can't give what we don't have. And so I think in this world, we want to gladly love other people, especially when we consider our faith, like we're called to love other people. But the problem is we don't do that very well when we don't love ourselves. When we look in the mirror and we don't like what we see. Or we look at our lives and maybe we don't quite have what we thought we would have. And we spend a lot of time, probably way too much time, beating ourselves up. Essentially like dumping little bits of water out of our bucket over and over and over. And then when we get into this world, we experience less meaning when we interact with other people because we have nothing left to give. And so Brene talks a lot about this idea of self-compassion because basically when our bucket is full, not necessarily overflowing in weird ego-centric ways, but just full, we can engage with this world in much healthier really ways that I think are biblical, the ways that we're called to live this life, the way that we're called to engage both with our God and with other people. And so if we think about this full bucket analogy, that kind of points me to Mark 12, 30 through 31. It's a verse that probably most people recognize. Most translations sound identical, like they don't change a lot over time. It says to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. So the first component of self-compassion is to see that we were created in the image of God. And so when we don't love ourselves, when we don't have self-compassion, then we are not living out this idea of loving God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, and all of our strength. Because we're trying to love God out of an empty bucket, and God created us in His image. So self-compassion and self-love is a reflection of loving God. We can't give what we don't also have. The second part of this verse, or this selection of verses, verse 30 is about God. 31 says the second most important thing is to love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these two. And so again, we can't give what we don't have. So we can't live a full, meaningful, wholehearted life if we have nothing to give to others. And so in that rowboat analogy, kind of there's this symbiotic exchange of good and bad. In our lives, for our lives to have meaning and for us to experience true authenticity, vulnerability, and courage, we have to love ourselves first. And we do so because we were created in the image of God and that He loves us and He sees our value. And then we can love our neighbors as ourselves. But if we don't have self-love, we can't give. And so the whole thing starts to break down when we give of ourselves to other people, and we kind of lay down our lives for other people prior to also having this understanding of, I am worthy, I have value, I was created special, unique. And like we talked about last week, our strengths and our weaknesses give us room to step into this self-compassion that we don't need to be perfect. But we do need to spend intentional time putting water into our buckets, loving self, reflecting on who we are and where our value comes from. And then we can live in such robust ways, really with vulnerability, authenticity, and courage as we give love, we show love to God and through God to other people as well. So this week in your faith, practice what it might look like to reflect on yourself. Like picture this bucket that you carry around and look for ways that you can pour water into that bucket so that you might give back out in your faith. But don't start by just giving. Start with self. Fill your own bucket. Just this week, focus on where your value comes from, what your values are, what you can contribute to this world, what God sees in you. Fill your bucket with that before you start going out and loving your neighbor. Thanks for watching Faith in 5. If you like what you see, please like and share. If you're interested in making a donation to our ministry, please click the link below.